Hello and welcome back to the Doctor Who Marathon. I'm your host McEdam, and today we're going to be talking about the Series 10 episode, Empress of Mars, written by Mark Gatiss and is directed by Wayne Yip. Now, two things before I start. Due to scheduling conflicts in my personal life, I had to watch the episode 2 weeks after watching it. So if I get some facts, I'll probably get some facts wrong. If I do, I apologise. But I'll try my best to remember. Secondly, as well, as you can probably see, I have changed the camera angle. It's not going to matter. Most people only really use this to listen to my voice, I think. Or at least I hope so anyway, because it's the opinion that matters. If it looks better than the original setup, well, actually it doesn't matter because I can't use the original setup anyway, because this room has changed a little bit, which means the last... Anyway. Completely, I don't know. This story sees the return of the fan favourite Ice Warriors that made their first appearance in the second Doctor story. The Ice Warriors that would later go on to appear in the Seeds of Doom. I think it was the Seeds of Doom, or maybe it's the Seeds of Death. It's one of those two. Then go on to the third Doctor stories, the Curse of Peladon and the Monsters of Peladon. No, it's not. It's Yes, the Monster of Peladon and the Curse of Peladon. Yeah. Only then for them to have a massive break and will not be seen again until the 11th Doctor story, Cold War, which was also written by Mark Gatiss. So that's quite interesting. It shows us here that Mark Gatiss, it was his dream project. Originally, this story actually started out vastly different from the Ed version. In fact, when Mark Gatiss and Stephen Moffat were trying to pitch for a story for Series 10, Mark Gatiss actually recommended that he makes a sequel to his Series 9 story, Sleep No More. How that would have turned out, it would be very interesting. However, that story was unmade, and it slowly became an Ice Warrior story, I suppose, as well as originally this story was going to be considered as a third Peladon story and making it, rounding off a trilogy of sorts. However, despite there being actual references still into the episode, the story is much more self-contained in terms of its narrative. So that's right. That's really interesting. I personally find. But anyway, on to the episode. We actually start off with a pretty light-hearted, silly, which kind of sets up the tone of the story to somewhat. Where we see NASA, they're about to get some of the first detailed images of Mars, where the Doctor, Bill and Nardole are actually there, just the Doctor having a nice expedition and wandering the universe, just happens to take it to NASA, and there's all these comically light elements, only to end off the pre-credit sequence with a message on Mars written in stones, laid out on the landmark, "God save the Queen," which for those of you who don't know is a Victorian term. God save the Queen. Actually, it's more like a British term. It's probably been used way before that. But yeah, and right off the bat, I think this is a pretty weak intro to the story. It felt very discontent to the rest of the story. It does set up the mood of being a light-hearted adventure of somewhat, and does have that kind of James Bond aesthetic where the pre-credit sequence actually seems very self-contained. The Doctor, Bill and Nardole don't go to NASA any point after this point. But it's just poorly... It's just not that interesting until the God Save the Queen moment. And that just takes you back. And you kind of laugh at it the first time. But when you watch it again, it's kind of like, right, I'm going to skip this so I can get into the main narrative, the main focus of our narrative. For James Bond, it works because it's a movie. And not only that, they actually indulge some really interesting camera shots and angles into this. However, with this story, it's a TV episode, a singular episode, as well as the scene just doesn't do anything. It's just the Doctor, Bill, and Nardole telling some jokes, being charismatic as always, which we've seen a lot throughout this series. It's one of the greatest strengths of Series 10 is our four, well, technically yes, 4 main leads, but we'll get onto that at the end of the episode. And but main 3 leads are very enjoyable to watch, especially Peter Capaldi, Pearl Mackie. They're bantering off each other, as well as Peter Capaldi and Nardole. Absolutely phenomenal to watch. So the story then, after the credits roll, are mainly set on Mars during Victorian times, where we discover that there are actually Victorian army men in Mars, as well as them having a sort of slave, if you will, in the Ice Warrior Friday. I can't remember if they actually gave him a name, but in the terms of the story, but the rest of the Victorian army call him Friday, and the story just kind of like, yeah, his name's Friday. We get to meet some of the crew members. Most of them are red shirts, characters who are clearly designed to be killed, shot, and for red shirts, they are pretty generic red shirts. You've got that one where it's like he's greedy and he's clearly going to get killed by a point where he will, where he gets captured with the jewelry in his hand as he tries to steal, and the whole dilemma of the situation unfolds, shall we say. As well as these characters are just not that well in verse. At least the red shirts. There is a art form. I know this is going to sound really stupid, but there is an art form to red shirts where you do make them likable. You do have these little interesting, short, but interesting dialogue that makes you feel like that these are real. Maybe not characters you connect, because, you know, you're not really supposed to. You're supposed to connect to the main characters, but the red shirts, just the art form of red shirt and characters is like right off like the pot. Apart from, like, you know, there is a scene where you can feel that they try, but it just clearly comes off as a reference. We will get onto that. But in terms of our main cast, in terms of this episode, there are 2 that we mainly need to focus on. God Scare? Yeah, that's a character played by Anthony Croft. He is the captain, and he's clearly had some sort of damage in his past. He has his he's kind of given up on life as well. His morale in this narrative is weakening of what, and you can kind of see it in in his face, all wary, and he just can't seem to keep up with all of these younger regular fellas. And Anthony Croft does a fantastic job. As always, he's always a great actor to see. He doesn't have a lot of roles in TV and movies, but when you do see him, he always brings his A game. He always gives a very realistic performance. And the other soldier is a character called Catchlove, a young and inspiring captain who he is kind of the shoot first, ask questions later kind of fella, and he's easily offended, and he is, you know, he just wants to fight. He just wants to prove himself, but he's clearly like the villain, one of the villains of this piece, because this story is mainly a love letter to the 3rd Doctor era. There's a lot of fan service for that particular era. Now, this is a type of story which I've collectively have been calling the diplomat stories of Doctor Who, where you have these 2 opposing forces. Usually they are humans and some sort of reptilian creatures, but mainly humans are usually the one side of the debate. and both sides have good points. Both sides have good characters and bad characters that want to inflict conflict and encourage essentially the other one's destruction. And it's up to the Doctor and his companions to try and get these characters to see reasons to stop the two bad guys from each side, and also helping the good guys from each side. And in that regard, this story does actually a very good job here. We do generally see a good side, as the Doctor points out in this story, and in this narrative, in this point, the humans are the invaders. It is humans that have come to Mars, and try to treat it as if they now own it. We are British. Mars is now under the Empire, kind of thing. And it's really interesting that Mark Gatiss actually puts Victorian soldiers and how you have that Victorian mindset in the characters. But on the other hand, they are so overtly underpowered that they will get absolutely slaughtered if they inflict conflict. And the Doctor knows that, you know, it's only really one person that's pushing the army into a particular mindset of, let's get into a fight. We need to show that we are superior. We need to show that, you know, Mars is now part of the British Empire, kind of thing. And this rest of the Doctor's trying to convince the rest of the humans that this is just not a good mindset. And on the Martians, on the Ice Warriors front, there's a character, Friday. He basically tricks the humans into resurrecting the Queen, Atraxa, played by Adele Lynn. I believe that's how I pronounce her name, who does a fantastic job as the first female Ice Warrior that we see on television. I don't know if she's the first female Ice Warrior overall. Big Finish might have beaten them to it, but this is the first time on screen we've seen a female Ice Warrior, and it's exactly how fans imagine a female Ice Warrior to be, especially a queen. And she, not that she, you know, she wants conflict per se, but she can see that the other team, that the humans, are very eager. And she, as a warrior, returns the favour, if we shall say. The story does kind of lean more into her favour, even though if you go just by purely on the facts of the narrative, she's equally as bad. I mean, she makes the first kill as well, but she also as well pushes the conflict when it's like, I will grant them mercy, a merciful death, and the Doctor screams, and we get this massive conflict, which, like I'm trying to explain to it, and it doesn't sound that interesting, and the story really isn't. It's a kind of story the Doctor Who has done multiple times. The only thing you really think is the environment, because this is the first Ice Warrior story where we see them on their home planet of Mars. We've been to Mars before on waters of Mars, and we've seen the Ice Warriors before, but we've never seen Ice Warriors on Mars, which is really strange now that I'm saying that out loud. And the ideas of Victorian soldiers coming to Mars, like, how do they even get there? There's many references to the wider landscape of Doctor Who. As I've stated, there's many references to the Third Doctor era. We have Ice Warriors, you know, classic Ice Warriors within a classic diplomatic story. We also see a picture of Queen Victoria, and it's a portrait of the version of Queen Victoria that we see in Tooth and Claw, with a car. The name is eluding me at the moment, for the painting of her, which is a very cool reference. It seems to imply, I don't know if this is true or not, the story never states it out, they never say the word, but this could be a version of Torchwood, a military matter that deals in a supernatural that goes above and beyond to protect the United Kingdom and, most importantly, Her Majesty the Queen. So that is quite interesting and does have larger implications into the larger aspects of Doctor Who. Was Torchwood an intergalactic organisation? Were there boundaries beyond Earth, as well as having multiple bases, of course, on Earth? That does lead you to consider how big Torchwood actually is. I mean, they had this kind of technology during Victorian times. Of course, maybe Jack had some influence into keeping it much more earthbound, much more unit style than the intergalactic Torchwood that we could have seen going by this story. But it's an interesting dilemma. There's also another Third Doctor reference where one of the red shirts says the characters, RHIP, rank has its privileges, which is a reference to a similar scene, which is like a word for word the same scene in Day of the Daleks, if my memory serves me correctly. That is like literally like word for word the same line. The scene kind of tries to play it off as it's a fun homage, and it's making these minor characters a little bit more interesting. But it just generally feels like that Mark Gatiss just copied and pasted that scene into this story. As a fan, it did kind of bug me. It did take me out of the experience. There is also another Third Doctor reference, but which we'll get onto that when we get to the final scene. You'll know what I'm on about if you've seen the story. I forgot to mention, in the story, Nardole, the Doctor and Bill get separated from Nardole. Nardole uses the TARDIS, but the TARDIS seems to just have a mind of its own and disappears, and actually lands in the Bristol University, which is the main series has been set in, and Nardole goes to Missy for help, trying to steer the TARDIS back onto Mars. It's not a particularly strong narrative here, but it does have bigger ramifications for the rest of the series. So that is, that's quite interesting enough. So my main issue with the story is that its narrative isn't that particularly strong. It's, I can't really go much into detail about it because it's a story that we've all seen before and we've all kind of experienced. It is kind of dull. One of the few things that actually was really disappointing in my eyes about the story is Wayne Yip's directing, who so far hasn't directed a bad episode yet, but this is clearly like a massive step down from his previous stories that he has directed, especially on his class stuff. This is clearly like my least favourite Wayne Yip story. The camera doesn't really have that much of a flavour, barring a few standout shots. One, of course, is another reference to the earlier area of Doctor Who, where it's a reference to Tomb of the Cybermen, where we see the Ice Warriors basically reviving, and you see their silhouettes in these caverns all over the wall. A clear nod to Tomb of the Cybermen, where a similar thing happens where all the Cybermen pop out of their expended animation, which happens also in this story with the Ice Warriors. But like, most of the story is just quirky dialogue. There's a lot of humour at the expense of the Doctor, where he doesn't understand pop culture references. There's a bit where Bill mentions Nardole, not Nardole, what the hell? My brain fuzzled then, where she mentions the Terminator, and the Doctor clearly doesn't know what that is. She also mentions the film Viking, and how there's a scene where somebody character gets stabbed in the eye, and then it leads to an awkward situation with Friday, who's also got his eye stabbed. And it all leads, and it's a build-up to a joke in which the Doctor finally does get a human movie reference, and the movie is Disney's 2013 classic Frozen. That was the build up to that joke. It's just it felt way too hard to try and appear funny when it really wasn't, let's be honest. So, how does the story wrap up? Catchlove basically reveals to the rest of the crew that God Scare, he was basically a traitor. He was scared and he evacuated his post during a conflict and he ran away, and he's basically put us here as a punishment for his actions. And so Catchlove basically consumes control and starts a massive conflict with the Ice Warriors. The story then basically plays out as what you would expect. The Doctor and Bill team up with Friday, who can see what humans can do. He got help from the humans and he wants to trust them, making Friday a very interesting character who goes even against his own people to try and get this diplomatic between the two races. Very interesting. And he kind of gains his friendship with Godscare to try and dethrone both, to try to dethrone Catchlove as well as trying to get Atraxi to see reason. Also, biggest letdown of the story is that Atraxi isn't that interested in the character. She isn't. And actually, I think the actual ending of the story is really interesting, in which after dethroning Catchlove, Godscare basically sacrifices himself. He's like, right, I am ready to die. I will die. You spare my men, just kill me. And Atraxi is like, you were willing to do that. You deserve a warrior's death in battle, but for now you will take as my right-hand man, and I fully respect you and your people. We will let them go. And that is actually, like, you know, a nice little sweet moment. It doesn't really have that much of a ramification for the rest of the story. It does also feel a bit tad on, if I must be honest. It does link with the characters very well, but the story arc really comes into the very end of the story, clearly trying to get a resolution to this narrative. This leads then into a one of probably the biggest Doctor Who references that nobody was expecting, where the Doctor gets a communication from the Galactic Council to Mars, and we see the return of Alpha Centauri, played by Johansa Churchman, the same woman that played Alpha Centauri way back in the two Peloton stories, making her having the largest gap between episodes when a character appears. And it's the same actress as well. I believe she was like 90 something as well when the episode aired, when this episode aired. So that's really cool. That's really cool they got that. And it was just a kind of cameo. But like the way it's set up, it's clearly like a reference to something. But you do have to think that most people who watch New Who are younger fans who wouldn't have seen that story. Even classic Who fans might have not seen those stories. So they might have seen that like big eye thing on the screen and been just like, what the hell was that? And so that's really the end of the story Empress of Mars, with a teaser for the next episode when the TARDIS returns to Mars. The Doctor and Bill enter, only to be greeted by not only Nardole, who apologises in advance, but also Missy, who proclaims that she was really concerned for the Doctor and hopes that he was okay during his encounter with the Ice Warriors, leaving the Doctor and Missy to kind of have this kind of stare-off. And that ends the story leading into the next narrative. So, Empress of Mars, I think a lot of people will agree on me on this, that even though it does have its fans, it does have interesting moments. It does have interesting ideas that it's kind of sandboxing with. But in terms of what the story's trying to go for, what the narrative is, what Mark Gatiss is actually playing with his tools, it's come off as a very generic episode of Doctor Who. Nothing much is tackled here. It's just light-hearted for the sake of light-hearted. And I think I do still enjoy it. I do like watch it on time to time, and I don't like hate it. I put it down. I have fun. I do laugh at the jokes and stuff, but there's so much more the Doctor Who can offer, especially with this premise, that it should have been a two-parter. By the way, this episode should have been a two-parter, and yeah, it's just a complete and utter shame that this story was given this light-hearted, very, like, extremely light-hearted, extremely safe storyline. And so that's Empress and Mars. So join me next time, where the Doctor, Bill, Nardole, try to show Missy compassion by taking the TARDIS team into a proper Viking adventure in the land of Scotland. And we see the past, a historical event play forth in their characters' lives. So join me next time for Eaters of Light, and I'll see you next time on the Doctor Who Marathon. Ta-ra.